This is Jay Sekulow. Breaking news. President Biden sends advanced weapon systems to Ukraine.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jay Sekulow.
Hey everybody, welcome to the broadcast. A very interesting but yet confusing situation. The president last week said that he was not going to send advanced weapon systems to Ukraine, not additional weapon systems, and then decided he will send these advanced weapon systems. And there's an interesting New York Times opinion essay that says President Biden, what America will and will not do in Ukraine. And this is from is drafted by the president. Here's the problem. We are telling Russia what the United States will and will not do in Ukraine. When you ask yourself, does that make any sense from the military standpoint? We're joined by our senior military analyst, Colonel Smith. Colonel Smith, it seems like to me, why would you convey to the enemy, and unfortunately they're the enemy right now, what you're about to do or not do?
He has done this already repeatedly, but this is, I think, perhaps the most dramatic, worst case example of him doing that. Tactically and strategically, Jay, it simply is not done. It is so not done, it borders on the point of being crazy to actually telegraph to your adversary, these are our limits. This is what we will do. This is what we will not do. It makes absolutely no sense. He continues to do this repeatedly. And it's a mistake, tactically and strategically, to actually tell Russia what their limits are. Anytime you tell an enemy what your limits are, they know how to plan their tactics and strategy, and they will respond accordingly.
Andy, the other thing we know is from history. We know that the Russians, of course, they're monitoring this very carefully. They're saying already, let's not talk about worst-case scenarios. They're saying that this is adding fuel to the fire. They've also said they've let at least the Russians through their propaganda arms, their state-owned broadcast media, of saying World War III has already started.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. They're presaging exactly what is going to happen if something happens on their territory. Now, the president said in that op-ed piece that we are giving these things to the Ukrainians for use, and I'm quoting, on the battlefield in Ukraine. Well, that's an aspiration, but it may not turn out to be the case. A rocket may go beyond the Donbass region into Russia. Then what happens? The Kremlin spokesman says we don't want to talk about that, but the reality is you have to talk about that, because by presaging what you're going to do, it's like President Eisenhower and Winston Churchill telling the Germans we're going to invade our second front in Normandy, or we're going to go through Africa and come up through Sicily and Italy. We would have never made those statements. We would have never said that. We would have never done those things in World War II and historically, or what the Russians did on the Russian front in the Russian winter when the Nazis attacked them. It is folly to be presaging and to be announcing in advance what you are going to do and how you're going to do it militarily.
Wes, when we come back from the break, I want to talk about what these weapons actually are. But the fact is, weapon systems are as only good as the operators of the systems. And these are American weapon systems. Do the Ukrainian soldiers have the training to do this?
Yes, we have been training them on the MLRS system. The HIMARS, this new system, is an adaptation of that. So I think we're training them well on how to use it. The question is, when they promise us they will not use them to fire into Russia, we have no way of making them keep that promise. Again, the Russians are always going to claim anything we do as a provocation. I don't think this is as much of a provocation as the Russians will let on, but it still is a provocation. It is. The stakes are a little higher. They will use it. Absolutely.
All right, we're going to take phone calls and comments coming back, Logan, too.
That's right. If you have a comment, if you're on social media, put it in the chat, put it in the comments. We'll get to as many of those as we can, but also phone lines are open if you want to be on the air. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110 to have your voice heard today. You can be on the air. All the lines are open as we just open them up. So if you want to call, perfect time to do it. And again, put your comments in on social media. We'll take some of those. And check out all the amazing work and the great content available at ACLJ.org. It's a great place, obviously, to go and support the work. But it also has so much, really, an endless amount of great content produced by our team at ACLJ at ACLJ.org. We'll be right back.
More help is on the way to Ukraine in the form of weapons. President Joe Biden says the U.S. will send more advanced rocket systems and munitions as Ukraine's war with Russia rages on.
CNN reported last week that the Biden administration was preparing to step up the kind of weaponry it is offering Ukraine by sending advanced long-range rocket systems. Russia warned the U.S. will, quote, cross a red line if those supplies are sent.
Are you going to send long-range rocket systems to Ukraine?
We're not going to send to Ukraine rocket systems that can strike into Russia.
Lindsey Graham, senator who tweeted as this, quote, the Biden administration's decision not to send these weapons is a betrayal of Ukraine and democracy itself. Ukraine is not asking for American soldiers, just advanced weapons to protect and defend themselves from Putin's invasion. Apparently, once again, the Biden administration is intimidated by Russian rhetoric. This is another terrible day in the continuing travesty of Biden's foreign policy.
Ukraine and the Ukrainian government is saying is we need more advanced systems, particularly more advanced missile systems in order to combat Russia, especially when it's making this progress in the Donbas region. We need to be able to hit their positions behind enemy lines, and we need to be able to hit their resupply areas.
A day after saying the U.S. would not provide Kyiv with any rockets that could be used to strike Russian territory, President Biden said he agreed to send medium-range rockets after receiving assurances from Ukraine.
There had been thought for a few days that the US had agreed or was going to send these weapons, and then there was a little bit of conjecture as President Biden was doorstopped by a journalist and asked whether or not they'd be sending them. He said he wouldn't send any weapons that had the capability to be launched into Russian territory. So that had everyone in Ukraine slightly worried that they weren't going to get the weapons that they needed. President Biden now confirming, shoring up that he would be sending those weapons.
Talk about a confusing foreign policy. Talk about a confusing military policy. Now, I'm going to play for you some sound from the President of the United States all the way back 24 hours ago on Monday. This is what he said.
Are you going to send long-range rocket systems to Ukraine?
We're not going to send to Ukraine rocket systems that can strike into Russia.
Yeah, so that comes obviously from President Biden. If you couldn't hear it, I'll read it to you. A reporter said, are you going to send long-range rocket systems to Ukraine? And President Biden said, we're not going to send Ukraine rocket systems that can strike into Russia. But Wes, we obviously know things quickly change.
Right, they do. And it seems like when reporters ask President Biden a question, he has this compulsion. He feels like he has to give an answer. And, there's you don't have to answer every question that you're asked, especially when it comes to this kind of very important strategic/tactical question about what we're doing with an adversary. I will say this, though, Logan. He is waffling back and forth, and he's obviously telegraphing to the Russians what our limits are. This weapon, though, the HIMARS is the one that's under discussion that they're going to officially announce today that we're sending to them. It is an artillery weapon. It is a very good one, but it's not like it can go hundreds of miles into Russia. It's not that kind of a system. It's not like, what is used in the Middle East, the Scud missile system that has a long range. The range on this weapon is twice that of a typical cannon, an artillery piece, which is about 20 to 25 miles. This one can go about 50 miles, but here's the difference. It is extremely accurate. It has the equivalent, it can carry around the equivalent of a 500-pound bomb dropped from a plane. It's GPS guided, but there is one version of this, the ammunition that can go 200 miles. We are not sending that to Ukraine. The weapon we are sending and the rounds can go about 50 miles. Of course, they could put that on the border of Russia and Ukraine and fire 50 miles into Russia. And again, it is a very, very accurate, deadly weapon.
Yeah, and what is the strategy, or is there a strategy? Because it seems like this does come up not just with the Biden administration. I could say this comes up with a lot of administrations, which is to almost telegraph what the process is. There's got to be some reason that you would is this part of sort of a war game to be like, let them know what's happening a little bit so they're prepared, so the conversation goes back and forth? Because it feels like we're always reporting on things before they happen like this. And what's the point?
The only time this is generally done for a good reason is if you're trying to really, really tell someone to back off. It's a little late for that. They've already invaded Ukraine. But it's like Andy was saying a moment ago. Other than that, or disinformation campaign, This is something, Logan, that's simply not done. You do not tell the enemy what your limits are, what you ultimately will or will not do. Tactically and strategically, it makes no sense.
Yeah, we're going to be taking some calls and comments also on this. If you have a question or comment, please go ahead and put it in the chat. If you're watching on Rumble, if you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, we take some of those and we'll take some of those on the air, as well as some phone calls. You can call us at 1-800-684-3110. Now, a big part of the conversation that's come up is sort of the backpedaling that the Biden team seems to have to continually do, which is President Biden says something, and then shortly after, someone else in the team comes in within 24 hours, cleans up any of the mistakes, in quotes, he make. Now, as someone just watching, I honestly thought President Biden was making a mistake, was saying something that he didn't mean to say or want to say, and the team had to come quickly and go, no, that's not what he meant. Reports are kind of coming out that that's not necessarily the case, and that President Biden is upset with the team that's coming in and batting cleanup. They're coming in and saying, no, we'll fix everything. We're going to make sure everything is okay, because he is meaning what he's saying. And Andy, something you could comment to. I think it's interesting. Someone who's worked with presidents before. It's kind of sad in a way, because the president is saying what he wants to say, but clearly isn't in control of the actions of the White House.
Well, that's exactly right, Logan. He is. What he says, he means to say. I mean, he's always been very blunt, whether you agree with him or not, or whether you think that he is in command or not. He has always been very blunt in what he believes, and he says it, whether it's I'm going to defend Taiwan if the Chinese strike, or I'm going to send missiles into the Ukraine, but they can't reach Russia, and so forth. And now his advisors are coming in and playing cleanup, and they're saying, look, you're undermining, that's what he told NBC News, you're undermining and smothering the authenticity of what gave me the power in the first place. And in addition, what you're doing, and this is the part politically that is so terrible, is that you are giving the Republicans a talking point that you are not in command.
Right.
That if you say something, it is liable to be walked back and taken back by your advisors. So, it is better to say it and leave it than to try to unsay and unscramble the eggs, Logan.
This is from NBC News. So we're not talking about from Fox News. You're not talking about from Newsmax or OAN or any conservative-leaning outlet. This is from NBC News. I'm just going to read it from you. It's called Inside a Biden White House Adrift. And they claim, and this is the comment, Biden is unhappy about a pattern that has developed inside the West Wing. He makes a clear and succinct statement, only to have aides rush to explain that he actually meant something else. The so-called cleanup campaign, he has told advisors, undermines him and smothers the authenticity that fueled his rise. Worse, it feeds a Republican talking point that he's not fully in command. So again, just reiterating what you had to say, I feel a little bad for him. I mean, I didn't think I'd say that, but I do feel a little bad for him, because look, some of the things that he said, you go, wow, I can't even believe this left of a White House would say some of these things. Maybe they are a little bit more moderate, because the guy came from 80 years of being sort of one of the more moderate guys. And then obviously in the last 10 years has had to shift dramatically. So, but if he's not in control, it doesn't sound dissimilar to some of the situations we've had, maybe even in the W. Bush White House, where it seemed like there was always someone trying to fix. But again, that almost felt like an unintentional move. This is like, this sounds crazy, but feels like a deep state within the Biden White House that's like, no, we can't let this guy actually run. The difference between conservatives saying we don't think he should be the president, and people inside the White House in the West Wing saying, no, we don't think he should be the president either. We got to take care of this.
Yeah, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And if you play this out, it could actually be pretty dangerous, if this is actually going on in the White House. What I find embarrassing for the president and in this whole story is that whenever this report came out that he is frustrated and unhappy because of the walkbacks that are happening, then the White House actually came out after that, Logan, and walked back that too. They walked back the walkback. And if it is true that the president is frustrated and unhappy, that his staff is trying to clean up things that he does not want cleaned up, my question is, why has he not fired anyone? If I had a staff person that was undermining me and going back and countermanding what I say, at some point, I would let that person go. If he's that unhappy and frustrated, why hasn't he fired someone over this?
Maybe it's because it's the people who are responsible for putting him in power in the first place. And you have people who are really there behind the scenes saying, you don't want to do this by yourself. You have to have us because you aren't maybe the leftist president that the Democrat Party currently demands. Because you had a guy who, up until a decade ago, was known for being moderate even on like the issue of life. Was to the right of a lot of Republicans on those issues. And, all of a sudden, as politics shift, has a massive change of heart, as it seems, to fit in with the party platform. A big problem I think that we have in current politics right now is that party platform, because you give no room for nuance. You give no room for opinion, in your own opinion. You elected the guy. You elected Joe Biden. You want the views of Joe Biden. But instead you're getting this, group of people who are undercutting what he's doing. Again, I don't agree with what he's doing, but I also don't agree with having your staff, like you said, having to do this. And I feel for him a little bit in that sense. And I do think if it wasn't for maybe an extremist group of people who are really running the show, we would be having a much better time in this country right now.
Well, I think that's the reality, Logan, is that we have a group of people who are running the show and the president is not in command. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tolerated this. I can tell you his predecessor would not have tolerated this whatsoever. His predecessor said what he meant and meant what he said. And if you tried to walk it back, he would castigate you and get rid of you, most likely. But the president is not doing this. He is sort of pandering to the West Wing aides, the deep state really behind the president, who is making statements that are contrary to the public utterances that the president is making, and that as the president of the United States, he has the absolute right to make, which raises the question, why aren't you getting rid of those people who are undermining and undercutting you at every turn? And they are, because I listen to the president and I say, oh my God, he made that statement. I can't believe he said that. And then 2 minutes later, some White House aide is saying he didn't really mean this. He really meant this or this or this. If I were the president, I would not only be frustrated, I would be getting rid of some people.
Yeah, absolutely. As most bosses, CEOs, or whatever would be. But we live in a different time. Hey, we're going to take some phone calls coming up in the next segment. We got some on hold already. We'll do our best to get to those. But the next segment specifically. So if you want to call in, you want to be on the air, this is the opportunity. Give me a call right now. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. We'll hear clips from President Biden, we'll hear clips from Secretary Blinken, and we'll hear some more about the cleanup team coming up in the next segment. Again, support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. You can do that now and do that today. But I also encourage you to just go there and check the wealth of content that's on there, because I think a lot of people go there to support. You need to go check out the content. It's really amazing by our incredible team.
Ukraine's President Zelensky called on the United States to supply long-range weapons that can destroy Russian artillery from a safe distance. Overnight, in a guest essay in the New York Times, President Biden described how his administration is trying to strike a balance between helping Ukraine without triggering a wider war. He wrote the U.S. will send some long-range weapons, which Ukrainians have promised not to fire into Russian territory.
The United States has been among those offering support, donating billions of dollars in diplomatic, civilian and military aid. Now Washington has gone one step further. Writing in the New York Times, President Biden said, "We have moved quickly to send Ukraine a significant amount of weaponry and ammunition so it can fight on the battlefield and be in the strongest possible position at the negotiating table." The weaponry includes the M142 high-mobility artillery rocket system, missiles that have a range of around 80 kilometres or 50 miles. US officials have been given assurances they won't be used to strike targets inside Russia. The missiles will be welcomed in Kyiv. They had been requesting them for some time, and their military is losing ground in the east.
A senior administration official also tells our colleagues that the package would include $700 million, including other weapon systems like Javelins. One of the key points, though, is training. So Ukrainian troops will need training on these advanced weapon systems, according to a defense official to our Courtney Cubie and Carol Lee. That training is down to 1 to 2 weeks.
What the U.S. has done is drawn a line for now on saying how far they go as part of the coalition confronting Russia, and that is they're not providing the longer range missile systems that have a range of about 300 kilometers as opposed to 80, because they don't want the Ukrainian military to carry out attacks inside Russia.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We are going to take your phone calls and your comments coming in. First, let's hear, we'll start it off with President Biden, so you can hear the first part of the statement. And again, if you can't understand it, I'll kind of reiterate what he said. So this is President Biden talking about, specifically in a press conference, about the long-range rocket system, new weapons that are going to be sent to Ukraine. This was just from Monday.
Are you going to send long-range rocket systems to Ukraine?
We're not going to send to Ukraine rocket systems that can strike into Russia.
So that's what it was from. Are you going to send long-range rockets into Ukraine? President Biden response, we're not going to send Ukraine rocket systems that can strike into Russia. And now let's hear from Secretary Blinken, just from yesterday. Secretary Blinken.
Specifically with regard to weapon systems being provided, the Ukrainians have given us assurances that they will not use these systems against targets on Russian territory.
So not exactly the same thing. Not saying we're not providing them weapons that can do the damage. We're just taking their word for it. Now, obviously, we know Ukraine's in the middle of a crisis. I'm not saying we shouldn't be helping, but it does feel, again, like they're coming in and cleaning this up.
Yeah, there's a difference between not sending them weapons that can strike deep into Russian territory and then giving them weapons that can, with the promise from the Ukrainians that they will not do it. I will say this, though, concerning this weapon system, the value of this system in this Ukrainian fight is that the HIMARS system is excellent on what is called counter battery fire. The Ukrainian civilian population is taking a pounding from Russian artillery. And what this system is capable of doing is whenever the Russians fire artillery, this system can immediately track where it's coming from and do what is called counter battery fire and take out the Russian artillery. That's the genius of the system, and it's very, very important. But on the other hand, there is no way that you can assure the American people that the Ukrainians will keep their word and that they will not put this on the border of Russia and Ukraine and start firing rounds into Russia. All we have is their assurances to us that they will not do it.
All right, let's go ahead and take our phone call that's come in. Let's go to Laura in California on line 2. Laura, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Gosh, I just am appalled at the fact that our president seems to care more in his spending and in his actions and in his words about the national sovereignty of a foreign land than the land of which he's president. And I don't understand his radical and wild spending in ways that don't serve the American people in any way.
Well, I think that's a big concern. That's a logical one and a concern that a lot of people are having. When you have like what happened last week, and we're not necessarily protecting our schools, you have what's happening at the border, and you're not protecting against the fentanyl crisis or anything that's happening right now. But we are sending these very advanced, very expensive weaponry to Ukraine. That is a conversation that at least needs to be had about where our priorities are lying. And not that we shouldn't support Ukraine or get involved in some of these conflicts. Sometimes you got to, but it does when you hear those numbers, it starts to shock you because you know what isn't being done in your own country.
Well, that's true, Logan, and a lot is not being done. I mean, 4,000 people went across during the Memorial Day weekend, migrants across the Rio Grande. I watched them crossing the river in the face of the Border Patrol, who was just powerless or just told not to do anything about it. And we have gas, which I was looking at a statistic that the current average of premium gasoline is $5.32 a gallon, whereas a year ago it was $3 a gallon and change, $2 less than that. But we have to realize that we are a national power also, an international power also, and that what happens in Ukraine, in terms of the gas, yes, from the Russians and so forth, but in terms of just the international nature of the United States, we have to prioritize. It's a form of triage in a way. I think it's good that we are assisting the Ukrainians in doing what we're doing, but at the same time, I sympathize with the caller entirely. When two people go to shop at a grocery store, a man and a wife with no children and spend $147 when a man goes up to fill his diesel truck with diesel fuel, and spends how much for the filling up of that tank? $180 to fill up a tank. Those are the kinds of things that ring true to us here at home and that we do have to prioritize. And I think in the terms of the priorities, really, albeit we are an international power, the president is the president of the United States, not the president of the globe.
And I'd say $180 may even be low for some of these people. And I go in, I have a decent sized SUV. It's got a pretty big tank, got like a 30-gallon tank. Standard pricing where we live, that's $150, $160 to fill up. And when you see that, and you've never seen that in your life, it is shocking, to say the least. We did have a comment come in from Phil on Facebook who said, I understand the president upset with his staff and the direction of the country. So weirdly, it's interesting to see people going, hey, you know what? I understand the president is upset with his staff and the direction of the country. But newsflash, this is what he's saying, not me. He is the president. He can do something about it. Wes, should be able to.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if your staff is not following your policies, if they're countermanding the decisions that you make, you change staff members. You get rid of the people that are not falling in line. That's just standard leadership. What it does when this kind of thing keeps happening, it makes the American people very insecure about who is in charge, about what the president's policies actually are. Even if you dislike a leader in any organization, to include the United States of America, even if you disagree with them, if you know where they stand, that provides a certain amount of security. And so here we are, we're in the midst of hyperinflation. People are struggling. We're supporting a war in Ukraine, and federal spending's fueling that inflation. And yet you've got a White House where we keep getting mixed signals and no assurance that this is the policy that we will stick with and that this is the person in charge. Those kinds of things make the people very uneasy, to say nothing of the fact, Logan, that we're concerned about Ukraine's sovereignty and the Russians crossing that border, and yet our own southern border is total chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming up for our radio listeners, you're going to hear in the back half some analysis from Rick Grinnell on Iran's nuclear program, and also some of our work at the UN from earlier in this week. It's a very important analysis. We thought you should hear it again. So that's going to be coming up in the second half of Sekulow on radio broadcasts. For those who are watching online, this is going to wrap up today's online presentations. If you're watching on Facebook, you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, however it is, I don't think you lost a feed at a half hour. We're just doing a half hour for you today. Hopefully you found out some information. You can get informed and get engaged. Check out, again, the great work at ACLJ.org. If you don't know, on ACLJ.org right now, I'm just going to pull it up right now. There is so much the content that gets put up by our amazing team, whether it's our writing staff, our video team, beyond just the daily radio. You can obviously get involved also in petitions and all of the different aspects of the organization. It's broken up in a lot of different categories, whether it's for pro-life or what's going on in what seems like the radical left, like what's happening right now. You can listen to the radio show, watch, join in, sign the petitions, get involved in all the different categories. There's honestly also an ACLJ app that I don't think a lot of you take advantage of. Take a look at the ACLJ app. It's got some great content there and easy ways to get involved, especially on those petitions. You can easily do it with a click of the button. Really fast, really great way to do it. You can find that in the App Store on Apple devices. I believe it's available also on Roku and a few other places. You can find the ACLJ app. And until tomorrow, we appreciate everyone who supports the work of the ACLJ. And again, for your radio listeners, don't go anywhere. You're going to hear some really great analysis from Rick Grinnell on the Iran nuclear program. And we thought it was earlier this week. We thought you should hear it. And we appreciate everyone again for supporting the work of the ACLJ. Check out ACLJ at ACLJ.org today. And again, ACLJ.org. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. But stay tuned if you're listening on the radio.
For more than 30 years, the ACLJ has been fighting for freedom and liberty in the United States and around the globe.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is urging Turkey to release detained American pastor Andrew Brunson.
This morning, Pastor Andrew Brunson, who was imprisoned in Turkey for nearly 2 years, has been let out of jail. The